Well, working with orchestra has been my dream for many, many years. Um, Maybe starting somewhere in 2010, I really thought to myself, you know what, I want to bring all my musical experiences that I've had so far, classical music, jazz music, improvisation, but I also grew up as a classical pianist and composer. I want to bring it all together into one thing. And orchestra seemed to me the best way to realize this because I have all the colors. You know, if I'm thinking about marimba, I simply can write for marimba. I'm thinking about harp or bass clarinet. That's what I can do. So it became an obsession for me, and I was studying orchestration for many years until an opportunity came, and I started to work with different orchestras. So, to make this long story shorter, uh, when the opportunity came to do this in Dortmund with Orchesterzentrum North Rhine-Westphalia, I simply couldn't get it, go by me. I just had to accept it. We were talking about different ways how to make it happen, but we finally made it happen with Alexander Hulshoff. Um, I didn't know what to expect. I just knew that the orchestration of this band, of this group in Orchesterzentrum NRW, will be different from full symphony orchestra. I knew that I have to write for 4 flutes, 5 trumpets, and a certain number of strings. Lots of work, lots of work. But then, I was talking to my manager. My manager told me, "Do you really want to do this? There's so much work for you." And I said, "No matter what happens, I have to do this. Don't let it go away from us because this is Dortmund. This is I don't have any other home. My parents live here. My brother lives here, and I want to show my biggest passion, uh, jazz that meets classical music in the orchestral context. I simply want to share it with my fellow Dortmunder people. So I accepted the offer. I orchestrated 24/7 for a long time, and sending the scores in the middle of my tours. I have many other responsibilities in my life, teaching at Berklee Culture Music as well. Receiving emails from Orchesterzentrum, Vadim, will the scores actually arrive at some point? I was like, please be patient with me. The work is going on. And finally, I did send all the scores, and the day has arrived. I had to come here. I came by feet from my parents, from Arnstrasse. And here I am, and I didn't know what to expect. First, I met you, Daniel, and Alexander Hulskov, of course, and the wonderful team at the Orchesterzentrum NRW. And I was simply taken away by the good energy, by great vibe that was here. And I thought, wow, this will be amazing. And then I saw all the brass players, because my first rehearsal was with the brass and with woodwinds, and I was actually taken away. I mean, it was sensational. They played so well. So I told them in the very first rehearsal, guys, now that I hear how you play, I will tell more friends to come. Because you don't know what to expect. So another big part of this was the fact that Alexander Hulshoff, who is a famous cellist, conductor, a leader of Orchesterzentrum NRW, also a leader of Villa Musica, a man that has many other things to do, that he simply dived into my music with his whole heart and energy and talent. For a composer to see that his music is being taken seriously, that this is not just a job that is, paid with some money. There is no money that can pay dedication and passion. Passion and dedication are not transferable into money. Simply, there is no money, unless money is your dedication and passion, but this is clearly not our situation. So to see how Alexander embraced my music and how much energy he put into, making this actually happen and delivering it to these young musicians who have never played music like this before. They are mostly dealing with classical repertoire, and suddenly there is here this completely different language and completely different aesthetic. All these different rhythms and attention to detail with meters, 7/16, 5/4, 7/4. These are not just numbers. I actually mean them. I feel them with my whole body, and now I need this whole group to feel this just like I feel. Alexander just took it really personal, and this just made me happy. I wanted to be here as long as the rehearsals were going on, and then longer. Because then, the first violin, Birgit, really wanted to rehearse. Okay, we'll rehearse. It's about my music, so I have time, we would arrive earlier than normal rehearsals. We would leave later, after everybody. And that's how I like it. It means people are not working by the hour. People are not formally taking this job. They are actually putting their heart into it. And that's why the results are, I think, spectacular, actually. We were able to go beyond all the difficulties and deliver joy of creation to the people, Of course, there were mistakes, or, nothing is perfect. Maybe God is perfect, but the rest is not perfect. And we're simply striving for perfection. But the overall energy that was coming from the stage, and for me as a soloist, all the great vibes that I was getting from the orchestra, it was just simply incredible and unforgettable. So now I'm hooked to Orchesterzentrum NRW, and I want to be back. Well, I'm also an educator. I teach at Berklee College of Music in Boston. And one of the phrases that I say probably the most often, I remind my students, hello, this is 2000, usually I set 17, now I have to update. This is 2018. And every time they're like, oh, really? Well, our education system is very, very often slower than the developments in the arts. And sometimes people are dealing, in classical music, people are dealing with things that were created long, long time ago. But even in jazz, I teach jazz improvisation. People sometimes forget that this is not 1960, not 1965. Every time I say, hello, this is 2018, wake-up call for everybody, myself included. So projects like this are a sign that this is 2018. It will inevitably turn into 2019 also. The words like classical, jazz, rock, hip-hop, rap, all these words, in my opinion, are created by people who sell music. But since the music business has gone completely down and nobody is selling anything and nobody is making money anymore, we should probably finally forget about those words in general. When Beatles arrived, I don't think anybody knew how to categorize that music. It's classical, it's jazz, it's Dixieland, it's everything, it's blues. And then people at some point said, well, that's just Beatles. And now we say maybe indie pop or whatever, but this is just to sell things. When Keith Jarrett plays improvisation, we say jazz. But then he plays Bartok Piano Concerto, records it for ECM Records, and we don't know where to put this CD. Which shelf does it go on? Is it on jazz or classical? When Freddie Mercury arrived on the scene, and Queen has shown people that you actually can combine opera, musical theater, and R&B and pop and classical with songs like Bohemian Rhapsody. What is this? What kind of style is this? You know, I'm deeply convinced that true art doesn't need all those labels. And for these young musicians, I think it's very, very important to start to feel that styles can merge into each other, that worlds of pop and classical and jazz and blues and new music and avant-garde simply should merge so that something new can arrive. Otherwise, we'll still be playing only, you know, Chopin piano concertos and then be really, really scared of new music for the next 300 years, you know. So I think it's very important to let young musicians know that yes, there is new music, and new music is not only the avant-garde and highly intellectual, you know, very far removed from the listener music that I love and adore, but there is also, you know, simple, fun rhythms that can be orchestrated and played by the orchestra, that jazz knowledge and experience can be translated into orchestra and bring completely new language. You know, Ravel was doing it 100 years ago, but then people somehow started to go away from it. Even American composers use not enough jazz elements in the orchestra. So I think it's just like a little bit open, you know, open-minding for young musicians. And the rhythmic, it was interesting to, you know, in the modern music, I feel, in Neue Musik, so to speak, right? The rhythms can be very, very complicated, but somehow the precision is not as crucially important as in the very simple melody and chords that needs to happen in 5/8 and then 7/4, because if they don't happen, it will simply sound wrong, like in Mozart, you know, one step away and it sounds wrong. I think it was interesting for people to feel that now they really have to count. Now they really have to be on the money, you know, using metronome and actually playing the rhythms that are written there without much hesitation or shaking, you know. And it was a challenge. I could feel for people that it was a challenge. And at the same time, when I would say to them, please play this like you've heard bands like Tower of Power before or Jamiroquai, and they're like, yeah, cool, boom, So there is this knowledge in them, you know, but it doesn't get activated too often. So I think it was important for all of us. Of course, there are favorites. Of course, there are favorites. I'm a huge fan of, if we would take it chronologically, Bach, Chopin, Schumann, Rachmaninoff and Scriabin, Debussy and Ravel, Fauré, I should say, Prokofiev, Britten. This would maybe cover my classical world. In jazz, my favorite musicians are Keith Jarrett, still, Lyle Mays, amazing pianist for Pat Metheny Group, Ralph Towner, guitarist who has been living in Rome for many years, Gary Burton, with whom I've had an honor to work for the past 10 years. In rock and pop, I'm a huge fan of Joni Mitchell, Sting, Beatles, of course, many Russian rock bands that I grew up with, like Aquarium, for example, and DDT, and there are some great bands that have influenced me a lot. Machina Времени, the Time Machine. It's a great band too. And I got to meet those people actually, finally, now that I grew up with their stuff. So the range is huge, actually. You know, Dire Straits, you name it. Lots of great music from all the stylistic corners. I mentioned Queen. I'm crazy. I haven't been listening to it for a while, but I remember so much joy from those tapes coming to me, you know. And I think I'm learning from every and each thing that I get to hear, you know. I like this, it's not my idea, but I like this analogy that an artist is like a bee. The bee, the honey is produced based on what the bee is consuming to eat, you know. So if the bee is hanging around chamomile flowers, you get the chamomile honey. So in a way, I think my music is a product of what I'm consuming, not just by listening, but also culturally where I live. You know, it's definitely influenced by the place where I grew up, in Odessa, Ukraine. It's definitely influenced by Dortmund and everything that I experienced here. And in general, Germany, which the culture was so new to me when I came here, you know, big, in a way, big clash of mentalities, but also a big learning experience. It changed me living in Germany. And then, of course, I've been in the States for 16 years, first in Boston, then in New York for a short while, and then New Orleans. Can you imagine just being in that city, how much goes into you? And now I'm living in New York again, a melting pot of everything. So the bee analogy, my honey is informed by lots of different flowers and fruits.